Welcome to the Homestead Guy podcast. We have an exciting episode in store for today. I am interviewing Noah Sanders. So, welcome, Noah. Thank you for joining us. And
Great to be on here, David. Yeah.
just a brief introduction. Noah is a farmer, homesteader, and author in Goodwater, Alabama. He is a passionate follower of Jesus who desires to know him more and make disciples through his daily life. Together with his wife, Dorothy, and seven children, Noah has run a small farming operation producing vegetables and poultry products using all natural techniques based on the design of God and creation. Again, thank you, Noah, for joining us. I want to talk about several things and get to know you a little better and let my listeners get to know you a little better and what you're doing and what you're all about. But just in general roadmap, we're going to talk about your book. So, Born Again Dirt, this is my copy. We're going to talk about that one, ask you a little bit about that to get started, and then we'll talk about some other things too. So,
Awesome.
but this book is, I'll let you describe what it is too, but it seems like it's a biblically oriented and argued book about agriculture and doing that in a biblical way. So very broad strokes. And just in my experience in my circles, it just kind of seems like most people wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. We all say whether we eat or drink or whatever we do it to the glory of God. But when it comes down to the details and the practical applications of that, we kind of leave it um, up to people to do that on their own. I feel like a lot of times.
Mm.
So let me know if you agree with that and just what made you, what got you passionate about this and what made you write the book in the first place?
Well, I think probably like many people that write books, you end up writing the book that you wanted to read, but you couldn't find anywhere. And so for me, that was a little bit what this book was. Born Again Dirt is not a how to farm book. It's more of a challenging the church to be willing to examine or ask the question, how do we reflect our values? How do we reflect our faith in something like agriculture? If the title of the book is kind of a play on the idea that man was originally made from the dust of the ground. So as Christians, we're born again dirt. We're just, there's nothing different between us and the dirt we work other than the breath of God. And then at the same time, the other kind of reference there is that our dirt or our agriculture, I believe, if we've completely experienced a change of heart, a change of allegiance, a transformation of our desires and affections as a Christian, someone who's been born again, our dirt should be born again, as in the thing we do with our hands, whether it's agriculture or whatever, should look different. It shouldn't just be like, well, whether, before you're a Christian, after you're a Christian, like agriculture should all look the same. It's just farming, right? It doesn't have anything to do with God. Thinking, no, it should really have an element there that should be seen, should be, manifested in what we do. And I didn't really hear a lot of people talking about how, a Christian worldview applied to agriculture. But I think the biggest thing that really drove me to write this book was I just wanted to, having been saved at an early age, I just wanted to serve God with my life. I wanted to do everything to the glory of God, right? But it was like, what does that mean exactly? And typically in a lot of endeavors that we do, we talked about like carpentry, or I used to do blacksmithing. The way that you feel like you glorify God is you find a way to meet a need, and then you do your craft in a way that's with high levels of integrity and character, and and you're trying to do it in order to serve others. And so, but when I was, for instance, doing blacksmithing, if you ask how to make a nail, it wasn't a whole lot of controversy around the techniques to make a nail. But you talk about, and once you get into the realm of agriculture, how do you grow a tomato, or how do you raise a chicken? All of a sudden, you have these highly controversial opinions of what's a right and wrong way to do it, and oversimplifying it. I saw, where I grew up in Auburn in Alabama, where it was a university town. It was very industrial based. Science can fix all our problems, that we created ourselves. But there's all these problems with agriculture. It was very industrial and scientific, and so they had a particular way of approaching raising chickens, for instance. It was all about scale and quantity, and the chickens never saw the light of day. And then you had, on the other hand, people that were very um, honor the life, honor nature, very nature and organic and environmentally focused. But neither camp really talked about God. In fact, some of them were very hostile towards any kind of, Christian or perspective. A lot of the environmental kind of side was very new agey, and religion is one of those things of the past kind of thing, and science, and obviously culturally, science and religion, most people think that those don't fit together, so there's two different boxes in your life, right? And so when you're coming from an industrial point of view, you don't really ask God, how do you raise a chicken? You just feel like, well, we have dominion, whatever we can do, right? And so that it helped when I was like, well, why do these people have different approaches? What's caused them to have radically different approaches to the way that we treat plants or animals? And I realized it really was their different value systems, their different approach on their different worldview. One elevated in worship basically nature, and the other elevated in worship man and science. And so their one valued sustainability, one valued productivity. So you have all of a sudden these values were producing very different production methods, production standards, models, and so I just began to think of myself like, well, I completely agree with the worldview of either one of these camps. I mean, everything has an element of truth in it because it's, there was a truths in each side, but there was still a missing element of acknowledging the creator, acknowledging, our role as stewards. And so that was really where the book came from, was not to try to give all the answers, but to challenge us to say, if we as Christians were to live out the worldview and values that we said we believe, which is, God created everything and he owns everything, and we're just the stewards, we're broken, sinful people, and we can't do what we've been told to do without the transforming power of Jesus in our hearts. It's life is all about other people, not about, about serving, not about us, and only God can make things grow and things like that. What kind of agriculture would that produce? What would we expect to see in farms that reflect that kind of thing? And I really wrote the book because I feel like a lot of the Christians that are in agriculture are sometimes unknowingly reflecting and adopting methods that are living out values that are contrary to the values that they themselves, espouse or say that they believe. And it's totally unintentional. They haven't even thought about it. It's just an unevaluated part of our life, just like all of us have parts of our life like that. So the book was more of a, hey, I'm starting to think about this. This is really a battleground where Satan wants to rule and reign through, coming and killing and stealing and destroying in the area of food and food sovereignty and food production and health and all that. And we as Christians have a role to bring redemption into this area in applying the gospel to it. And so that's kind of the story behind why I wrote the book. Part of it is also because my dad heard me talk to so many different people about it. He said, "No, you just need to write a book so you can hand it to him, and then and then you don't spend so much time trying to explain it."
Yeah. Well, and that's very, very helpful. So yeah, when you're talking about the environmentalists versus other traditional farmers, whether they're Christian or not,
Hmm.
I about a year ago, or I don't know, but a while back, but before present, I was thinking about what's a good way to just do things easier, right? I mean, I wanted people to be interested in this. I wanted people to garden in their backyard and things. How can we make this easier so that we can kind of silence those questions of, I don't have time, I'm too busy, I don't have
Hmm.
anything done. But really, as I've developed it and tried to think more, be more thoughtful about these things, and like you say, what does the Lord want us to do with our lives and with our land and our gardens and whatever it is? Ease is not the first thing that would come to mind. And so, when you're talking about permaculture or food forests and all these things, I've seen that there's no silver bullet. There are principles there that can be used that
Hmm.
can make life easier. And I think we should mine those depths, as far as it goes.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's something that I've just come to realize over the last year, that the ease is not the be all end all. I mean, that's not really what we're going for. And I think you talked about that a little bit in your book, where actually the permaculture end of things is a little bit more like you're coming to things from a position of scarcity. And that's not how God created the world.
Mm-mm.
He has told us certain things that we are to work the land and and it will be productive and he will bless it. And so talk a little bit about that, like this concept of, this more modern concept of permaculture, environmentalist approach of scarcity versus God wanting his people to live in abundance and providing all of the resources. We just need to be a little educated about how those things work, particularly in the modern day, because so many people just live in the city and neighborhoods. We think food comes from the grocery store.
Mm.
Right? So talk a little bit about those two dynamics and why that's important.
Yeah, well, I'll try to touch on some of those things. I think whenever I'm talking to somebody about agriculture or homesteading or other things, I always want to come back to, how do we define success? What is it that we're shooting for here in the first place? And what is it that we're actually pursuing? Because, for instance, if you think that a life of ease where you have to do no work, everything's provided for you completely, and you can just be a complete consumer for the rest of your life with all the money you could ever want to spend, if that's what you've knowingly or unknowingly have adopted as your ultimate goal in life, then
Right.
it's going to determine what you pursue, right? If you view that a life of productivity, relationships, um, simple living where you can think and be free and hear from God and have what you need and have an abundance to share with others, then you're going to live differently. And so that's where we have to come back to what is it that we feel like is, well, I say that term, what do we feel like? And what I mean by that is, what do we sense as Christians that God calls us to and what he defines as success? What is he going to look at the end of our life and say, well, yes, that was well done, good and faithful servant. And I think the idea of scarcity is so dangerous because as Christians, if we are living as if we don't have enough to thrive, we don't have enough to be generous, we don't have enough to be grateful, then we're basically telling God he's a bad provider,
Hmm.
that he isn't who he says he is. And what we're doing is we're reflecting to the world that that's who we serve, is a God who doesn't give us enough. We have to barely scrape by. Now, Satan, what he does is comes along and says, "You really need all this stuff, and God's not giving it to you," which makes us think he's not being generous. But the idea is he is abundant in wanting to give us everything that he believes is good for us. And I think a few years ago, I was interviewing another homesteader on my podcast, and she said that she thought that the secret to successful homesteading when she first got started was diligence,
Hmm.
really being diligent. And she realized after several years that she believes now the secret is not so much diligence, even though that's important, but the real secret is contentment.
Hmm.
And contentment really is living in that belief that I have everything right now to be 100% effective in what God's called me to do and 100% generous to anybody he calls me to be generous to, because there's more where that came from, even if I give it all away today, and everything I need to be joyful and grateful. And that means that you're not waiting on anything. You're not a victim. You're not, being held back in any way, shape, or form. God's only holding us back from things that would be unproductive, really. We want to know what's step number 6. He's like, nope, just step number 1 first. That's all you need to know. And I think as we pursue lives for our families and stuff, we have to think, how can we learn to look around us and to live together in a way that our lives are productive in all the ways that God's looking for productivity. And I think another way I think of productivity is growth. Like if you're faithful, God adds to you. If you're unfaithful, he takes away from you. So if you're living a faithful life, you're fulfilling the responsibilities of caring for and working the things God's given you in your hand, as little as or as much as that might be, then the evidence that you're being faithful is God adds to you. That you're producing more than you consume, which means you have enough to take care of your own needs and to share with other people. And yet our culture tends to only to think not in terms of that, but in terms of just our value in our culture today in America is based on how much you consume. You know,
Right.
how nice is the car that you bought? How much is the house worth that you bought that you live in? Not how much did you produce? What are you doing with your life that's productive? It's how much can you consume? That's how we rate it. And if we look at, what God calls us to, it's very much he wants to provide for us through the production, the creativity and the relationships and stuff that he gives us. And I think all of a sudden, if we just view farming from well, can it make enough money for me to live a consumer lifestyle or homesteading? Is it easier than buying everything from the store? No, it's not.
Yeah.
But if we look at it from a different paradigm of productivity, of faithfulness, and working with our hands and reflecting God in that sense and providing opportunity for relationships, which is really the real fruit we want to see, right? Then it's very valuable and money couldn't even buy it.
Right, right. And okay, and so productivity, and you're not saying be as productive as you possibly can, because that would actually be counterintuitive to some of the biblical principles. And so my next question is, my son, my 12-year-old son, read your book too, and he loved it. One of the questions that he has for you is this idea of letting the land rest. So you
Mhm.
talk about a Sabbath rest, and that can look like different things, but one way it can look like is you rest your land, 1 year out of seven, or maybe you just rest a seventh of your land every year or something like that.
Mhm.
And so his question is, because we don't have, I mean, we have a little, almost an acre and a half, pretty large garden. We got a bunch of raised beds, box beds above the ground. And so he's looking at that going, well, do we need to rest some of these raised beds, every year? And so if you could answer that question, just the thought of raised beds, in a smaller setting maybe versus the land, however many acres you might be farming for your market garden. How might that look differently? And then just also that principle of as productive as you possibly can, but maybe not in a biblical sense.
Well, I'll just start with that one because, productivity, maybe it'd be better to say faithfulness because that's what I like thinking. Faithfulness is again like being loyal to and, consistent in the duties that that has been given to you. And faithful to it's if there's always an object of faithfulness, right? Because you can be faithful to the wrong thing, right?
Right.
Faithful to, yourself, faithful to, the US government, faithful to whatever, but it's only if we're faithful to God and what he's called us to, that doesn't look like workaholism.
Right. Right.
It looks like being faithful to all the elements that he's called us to in life, including rest. And that balance is what he's looking at all that. So I would say when we want to be 100% all in, all out for God, that's work hard, play hard, rest hard, as well as listen hard and sit with people and love them. And it's easy to just think singularly in terms of what productivity is and what is success. We had I have a to-do list of action items on my list today on the farm, but then we also had people stop by this morning that we had an opportunity to invest in, that relationship. So that's also productive, even if it didn't get things done, that feel like productivity on my list. And I think related to that, the rest element is, I think, connected to another principle that really ties into that abundance is if we want to see God adding to us, we have to be faithful. Because if you're faithful, he'll add to you. If you're unfaithful, he'll take away from you. And the second is, as you measure, it will be measured to you. So if you're generous, God will be generous to you. If you're stingy, like if he invests in you and you keep it for yourself, he's not going to invest more, right? Because he hasn't gotten a return on it yet.
Right.
And the same thing is kind of true with the land or anything that is worked, managed for increased output, whether it's us working, whether it's our animals or our land or anything like that. There's an element that we honor the life that God's given us and in the land and our animals by letting them cease from and rest from that labor, just like God did when He created everything. And I think, the resting on us one day in seven is definitely, a huge, really great way that we can do that. And then as far as resting the land goes, I think there's a couple principles I'm always looking to apply is like, how can I be generous to this land in my care for it? And then how can I reflect my dependence on the Lord, where just like we would say, even though it may be like the only good day seeming for planting weather-wise, and it's Sunday, and it's supposed to rain again on Monday, I'm going to be like, God, it's your garden, like I can afford to take a break. And if, even if it seems like I shouldn't be able to, you're the one providing for me. I don't have to kill myself and work 100% of the time in order to
Right.
provide for myself because you're the one that provides for me. So that
Yeah.
if you look in the Old Testament, the idea of that seventh year rest for the land was very much the principle behind it that God was trying to teach the Israelites was dependence on Him. It's a
Mhm.
risky, scary thing for them to do that, to kind of put their lives on the line for God to provide for them, you know, with the harvest of the sixth year, always through the seventh until the harvest of the eighth year. Um, and so for that reason here, as we are not currently living in the nation of Israel and exhibiting those principles in that particular demonstrative way that God set up for Israel, we need to be thinking, how can I reflect those in my context? And I actually currently don't rest one bed in seven like I used to because I found myself going through the motions and trying to figure out how to check all the boxes, and I felt like God's like, Noah, that's not what it's about, like, um, and so I was like, okay, well, so what do I how do I reflect this principle? And sometimes can just be through through the way that we're generously applying or planting other things, or a part of that's God wants us to be like listening. Okay, God, what do you want me to do? You want me to just stop? You want me to take a whole break from gardening this year? I don't know. Like, there's got to be a relationship there, not just a formula. And so that's what I would encourage, like you're saying, like, how can he reflect, generosity and not a greediness and overuse of the land and a dependence on the Lord? How does God want him to reflect that now on y'all's farm? What's something that you can do that when people say, why are you doing that? That you can point it back to that principle.
Yeah.
And so that then it's a real living thing, not just an outward, system that is dead on the inside kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. I mean, one of the things I appreciate about you and your book is that desire of just being a minister with what you do, and like you said, pointing people back to Christ and why is it that we do what we do. Um, I speaking of Mason, he's 12. He's reading all these books, your book, Joel's books, and we're doing chickens and a big garden in the backyard and learning all these principles. And he's um, for now, that's where his desire is. I think he's interested in pursuing that. And I mean, that could change, and that's fine. But I guess I wanted to see, as far as one of the things I talked to Joel about um, recently was his book, Family Friendly Farming, and just
Mm,
multi-generational farming business, whatever business that may be. And how do you keep the kids on the farm, or how do you keep the
mm,
kids, with you in that business? And I mean, is that something that's near and dear to your heart? How are you? I mean, are your kids interested in following in your footsteps, and are you encouraging that? And if
mm.
so, how?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's definitely a topic that I'm still thinking and praying about because uh, I want to disciple my children. I want to be a launch pad for whatever God calls them to in life. I want to, at the same time, uh, encourage them to appreciate and utilize, like, build on top of the legacy that they're getting, having been born in my family, and not just think too individualistically like our culture encourages us to think. We're starting over from scratch, like my history has no bearing on what I'm going to do in my life, which
Yeah.
I don't think is very biblical. I'm not at all, I think on one hand, you see some people that will force that on their kids, you know, expectations of how they're going to follow in their footsteps, which I think probably my tendency is to overreact to that by trying not to pressure them at all, which then ends up being not accurate either in terms of helping them appreciate the heritage and just what they've been given with the family that they're born into. But I think at the end of the day, our I want my primary focus to be that they are um, through all this being pointed towards the Lord, and that they, as they start their life, I know they are to the best of their ability seeking the Lord and they want to be wherever He is. Now, that's just if they choose to follow Jesus. I can't guarantee that, thankfully, my older ones have, and so I can kind of walk alongside them and help them stay committed to doing that if that's what they want to say that they're doing, following Christ. But that's the real goal is, farming can either be a distraction from God or a walk of faith following God.
Mm.
And you've got to figure out in your own life, what is it? Is it that thing that you're pursuing in obedience, or is it the thing that you're using as a distraction from the other things that really He's put in front of you right now? And but at this point in time, my oldest just turned 13, so he's a little older than your son there, and we're just trying to really uh, focus on having our farm be a context for experiencing, all the things that we hope will be a good foundation for them in whatever God calls them to, family, community. We really want our farm to have a uh, missional, purpose to it, where it's not about us and our happy little life as homesteaders, but it's about our family being positioned to minister to people
Mm.
and to show hospitality and bring joy to people's lives in ways that God can uniquely use us in this season right now. And and that's what I think I see in some, families where the kids are not interested at all. Not just that they're like, I'm not called to that, but they're like, nothing to do with it, don't want anything to do with it. That's what I want to avoid, if possible,
Yeah.
with my family. And I think there's an element of where it's got to be more than about us. It's got to be about, a mission, but
Yeah.
it's also got to be where the life that we're sacrificing for, we're enjoying it too. We're not just, denying the world and killing ourselves working hard and never like actually enjoying the life that of the benefits of the life that God's kind of given us together on the farm. So really trying to focus on, how's our joy level?
Yeah.
If somebody in the family starts to lose their joy, we need to reevaluate what's happening here, because if we're where God wants us to be and we had that right perspective, we should all be having fun. Doesn't mean it'd be easy, but we're having fun like a football team out in the mud, like blood, sweat, and tears going for, the last touchdown.
Yeah.
It's not easy, it's painful even, but they're having a blast. That's what we want to have as a family and not lose that, just in the details of basically so often having our own expectations of what we should be accomplishing and what, we should be doing in our life that isn't always what God's assigning us to do.
Yeah.
But one of the things, recently we've done is just things like trying to give our kids little plots in the garden for them to take care of, in addition to helping with the family stuff, having times of celebration. We just recently got a horse, which totally doesn't make any, financial sense necessarily, but it's been a big blast to be able to, we had an older gentleman from the community come over last night and was teaching the boys how to train them to drive, and, so we can pull stuff around the farm. Just adding that element of like, it's just for the people's sake, it's
Yeah.
just for the fun, the culture, the element of like, I want it to be when they leave, if they leave the home, like the farm, that they don't, there's an element that they don't want to, and that they want to come back, that they want to take with them whatever the good is, not that they're glad to get away, kind of thing.
Right.
And that if they're called to do something else, like we are the support base, cheering them on,
Mhm.
and that we're providing a stability that helps them to go do whatever it is God's called them to do in a better way. But I think that's just means that sometimes, talking to the kids or doing something is more important than planting the carrots today. It's more important than the other things on my list. And just being humble as a dad and as a husband and a leader to listen to what God's telling me through my family, through my kids, so that I'm winning their hearts and then I'm pointing their hearts to Christ in what we're doing. And that's the number one priority on our homestead, even if the garden doesn't look like I want it to, or things don't get done that I would from a pride perspective if I'm going to give a farm tour. So
Yeah, no, that's really good. So that's a good transition because you were talking about how you want your family and your farm to be positioned for ministry. And I think that does sort of define how you view that. And then the question I want to lead to is part of the theme of this season of the podcast is building community. So positioning yourself for ministry, you have customers that come to the farm. You have those relationships. You have just neighbors, I'm sure. You have and then there's other things too. I mean, just talk about how you see what you do as building the community that you're in,
mm,
and then there's also something that you're involved with that's building communities in other places as well. And I'm thinking of the Well-Watered Garden Project.
hmm
So, two questions really, but if you could just start talking about some of that.
yeah, a big passion of mine has always been discipleship, which is really just showing and telling people how to follow Jesus, and how to grow in following Jesus. And so that's obviously a priority for me with my family. But it's also something that I want our family to be involved in, to people outside the family, both in the church, and outside the church. And the neat thing is over the years, as we've done farmers markets, as we've done CSAs, as we've just bought things at the feed store, whatever it is, there's been so many opportunities to, engage with people in a way that allows us to talk about, you know, uh, the spiritual things and how they relate to the practical things that we're doing on our farms. And I think one of the things that was most helpful to me a few years ago, when somebody was talking about disciple making, if you're like, I want to make disciples, I want to impact people for Christ, right? What do I need to do? And what their response was really kind of piggybacking off of the idea that discipleship is a modeling process, right? It's something that you're modeling what something looks like for somebody. If you're going to you disciple somebody in how to ride a bike, you're going to show them what it looks like first, right? So you've got to model it. So the idea was, if you want to make disciples, you've got to be a disciple worth multiplying. And so I think that's a big part of the opportunity that we have and the responsibility first, with our families and with our own faith in general is, if we have a faith that's worth multiplying, if we are on fire for Jesus, if we are so excited about what we're doing every day because we see how it connects to our love for Christ, and we're like every day we're wiping the slate clean. We're like, what are we doing today, God? And so our gardening, our education, our kids, our family, our work, whatever we're doing, like if there's nothing that's not related to obeying God, we're going to ditch it and leave it. So everything you talk to me about, I want to be traced back to this is an overflow and an expression of how I'm serving Him. If we can really live that way, then when you're around people, they're going to see it. You know what I'm saying? They're going to hear it. It's not like you have to figure out, how do I reach this topic? It's just who you are. And it's hard to not open your mouth without connecting it to what you're passionate about and what your real heart is. And I think the thing that we found was really helpful, and with our farm, was it gave us a real tangible way to do things differently that we could link back to our value system, whether it's just honoring the chickenness of the chicken, like Joel Salatin talks about, or we're trying to rest our land, or we're trying to prioritize family, or whatever. We can all talk about why that's, even I've talked to people about permaculture. I'm like, permaculture is so cool. I said, it's very much like I see the same connection with like in the Garden of Eden, God planted all kind of fruit trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food, you know? And then my hippie farmer friend's like, permaculture in the Bible? I had never even thought those would connect, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just the way that you know, it gives us opportunities to talk about those in a real way that isn't me trying to preach at somebody. It's just me just sharing who I am and who God's making me into, and I'm wrestling with the same things that they are. But we've seen over the years, you know, the marketing and our customers have provided lots of neat opportunities for just praying with people and just having good, honest conversations about what they believe, what we believe, and just loving them. It's not about trying to argue or debate people or that kind of thing. I mean, and especially with our customers, I mean, it's people you would see every single week. You're bringing them food that you grew yourself, you know, and you connect on this real, they trust you in this real deep way. And then today, we've actually a few years ago swapped our kind of what we're doing for our business to just the training side because with a family that we're raising and all that, we could only run so many businesses at once. And we really felt like God wanted us to take what we had learned all those years running the market farm to actually teach people that could then take and help spread both knowledge of food production for food security, but also equip the church to be leaders in food production and faithfulness with the land, beyond what we could just impact with the customers we were serving, you know, as one little farm. And so now what we're trying to do is we developed as part of this network that we're a part of, Foundations for Farming out of Africa, a kind of a tool for Christians called the Wellwater Garden, which is just a simple 20 foot by 20 foot kind of demonstration teaching garden that builds on the heart element, heart characteristics of Christ, his humility, his faithfulness, and his unselfishness. And so we talk about what are the root problems with agriculture, which is really the opposite of those: pride, unfaithfulness, selfishness. What would agriculture look like if it reflected those hearts of humility, you know, acknowledging that we don't know what we need to about agriculture. We need to look to God for advice. You know, we need to look to his creation. We need to uh be coming at it from a perspective of just that humble service. And then what we're do is we kind of use that our kind of the teaching of the Wellwater Garden to show Christians how to build from the ground up, expressing the values that they say they believe as Christians, all based in a biblical worldview. So that when they explain or they teach this little garden, they're teaching all these biblical principles of faithfulness and stewardship and generosity and humility and everything in a real visible way that you can see in a garden. And yet it's just an example of what we need to be doing with the rest of our life anyways, whether it's agriculture or not. But these gardens are just a way, a simple tool for us to equip the church to multiply out the skill of land stewardship in a way that's based in the heart of Jesus and expresses Him, but also practically serves and equips people to with the tools to address the problems that they face in agriculture that are practical. You know, your weed issues, your watering issues, your bug issues, all those kind of things. And part of what we've seen is the churches, then if the church can excel in agriculture, you know, Christians can excel in agriculture and be passionate about Jesus and then just be available to serve people that need help with agriculture, then it just gives a real great way to let other people experience Jesus through you. You know, it's not just you telling them that they're a sinner and need to be saved, even though they need to hear that. It's them experiencing something that they don't have and being loved in a way that, hey, look, whether you come to Jesus or not, I'm going to teach you how to garden a really, you know, have a really great garden and explain to you my heart in it. But I'm just here to show you love. And so that's what we kind of have a passion now is we really feel like God wants to equip people that are called back to homesteading in the land in the church, like you and like other people, to do that well and to be the ones that the world turns to when what they trust in doesn't fails them.
Mhm.
That we aren't just in the same boat as them, but that we've built back on that. And I think on that foundation of Jesus to restore that relationship with creation. And just real quickly, I think some people would ask, what in the world does gardening and the gospel have to do with each other? Right. And I've had people challenge me on that before. Like, how can you justify weeding your garlic out there for hours or whatever when there's people on the other side of the world that are dying, going to hell without knowing Jesus, or they're starving or whatever. And it's a really good question because we do need to wrestle with that, right? Like, I only want to spend my life doing what's really impactful for the kingdom of God. But I think what we've seen is, we don't really, it's not so much that I think that God wants us to glorify him through what we do for him. He wants to glorify himself through our obedience to what he tells us to do.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so if he's told you to garden, and you're feeling, then you do that, and he can use that to change the world more than anything else that you could do. Um, but we want to see the church equipped to be in a position where the world looks to them and sees that progress. And I think what I wanted to say about the gardening the gospel is we tend to think of the gospel in that kind of way of man's broken relationship with God, the separation. Like sin is the gulf that separates us from God, and we need the bridge of the cross to allow us to get back to God, not be separated from him anymore. And that's a really, great way to look at it. But then you're like, where is gardening in that? Where is homesteading? Where's food production or construction or whatever else is, what does that have to do with, in that diagram? So it's more helpful for me to think about it in some cases, or explain it in the way of a more diverse set of relationships. So if we talk about like man and mankind at the beginning, had this relationship with God, the spiritual relationship, his relationship with himself, which is like his identity and his mission, purpose. And then he has his relationship with others. And then he has his relationship with creation. And those are all the relationships God created. That's really all of life, right? Our spiritual relationship with ourselves, others, and creation.
Hmm.
And when we rebelled against God, it broke that relationship with the creator, which then broke all the other relationships. It resulted in shame in our relationship with ourselves, blame in our relationship with others, and pain in our relationship with creation.
Hmm.
And all the suffering and bad things we see in the world today are really just expressions of those broken relationships, right? The idol worship and spiritual darkness, the broken relationship with God, our broken relationship with ourself, suicide, depression, all, gender dysphoria, all this stuff. And then our broken relationship with others, all the wars and conflicts and broken families and all that. And then our broken relationship with creation. I mean, the fact people are starving and are in poverty, like, and we have so much abuse of the land and creation and stuff. All those are just representations of our broken relationship with the one who made it all. And that's where Jesus fits in, because he's the one that allows us through his death, burial, and resurrection to be restored to God if we accept that. And then he begins to provide a way for us to restore and redeem all those relationships, right? He's like, I'll give you a new identity, a new purpose, a new meaning, like, so you can have this healthy relationship, not be ashamed anymore of yourself. Allow you to love others unconditionally and restore relationships even with your enemies, right?
Hmm.
But then this broken relationship with creation is one that we've kind of ignored as the church. We haven't addressed it. We haven't really talked about how our new heart allows us to restore that broken relationship with creation.
Hmm.
And so when we've abdicated that, then Satan rules and reigns in that area. And you have some of the highest rate of suicides amongst farmers in this day and age. Almost no new people going into farming. Farming being one of the most unprofitable things that you can get into nowadays, very unsustainable, producing food that no farmer ever intends to be unhealthy, but because of the system is very unhealthy for people because of the agribusiness, farmers, the whole processed food thing and all that. Just really a lot of brokenness in the world of food and farming. And I think a lot of it's because we've failed as the church to come and bring that the principles of the gospel of how our sin impacts our approach to how our pride, how our unfaithfulness and our selfishness has twisted that, and how can humility, faithfulness, and unselfishness uh, provide solutions for the challenges that we face today.
Do you see that getting better? So, you're describing how the church has ignored it, and
Hmm.
but yet in recent years, I mean, Homestead tsunami, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the things that you and others are doing, and it's getting out there more, and it does seem to be a movement that's growing. So, and you know, you're not. A lot of the demographic is Christians, right?
It is.
Do you see that growing? Is it growing exponentially? Is it growing slowly? I mean, there's still a lot of ground I think to make, but I mean, do you see it getting better?
From my perspective, I believe that there is a move God's doing in the church that is growing, because it's not like everybody's just following one central leader or something like that. It's like all these people individually in their own journeys hearing this call from God. So that's what excites me. I think the biggest thing right now is people that are, I think a lot of the leadership of the church, especially, doesn't know where to put that. They don't know what to do with that. I mean, Joel Salatin will tell you with his book, The Glorious Pigness of Pigs, you can't, he couldn't get their publisher couldn't get a single Christian leader in, in their whole circles to provide any endorsement for it. They wouldn't touch it, like you said, with a 10-foot pole. And I think a part of that's because it is, we don't often as Christians know how to talk about subjects that could be, um, that we don't agree on in
Right,
a healthy way.
right.
And so we either fall into legalism, where I don't grow GMOs because I love Jesus. So if you grow GMOs, you must not love Jesus as much as I do, you know, or license, whatever, like as long as you love Jesus and you do it to the glory of God, it doesn't matter whether you grow GMOs or not. And neither one of those really needs God, right? We've kind of left him out of the conversation altogether. We're not even asking him. Whereas the real point is, uh, we have to come to a point where we say none of us are where we need to be as far as our approaches to stewardship of the land. But we all had to be faithful with the starting point God gave us. So if you're an urban homesteader, you've got to be faithful and you're going to be held to account for the starting point God's given you. If you're a multi-generational 8,000 acre farm, corn and soybean GMO farmer, and you're starting to think about this stuff, you're going to be held accountable to the starting point you have. You can't just ditch that, right? And you have to say and so if we're both here, we know probably Jesus is up here somewhere calling us towards him. And the idea is we need to unify around growing, right? To better reflect God in the way and in what we're doing in our journeys. And the thing that I think I've been able to begin to appreciate more in my life is that as much as I like-minded people, you know, um, if you're trying to triangulate on a destination that you're going towards, if you're both at the same place, you can unify around the fact that we are both headed towards Jesus. Yay. And there's not a whole lot of motivation to really grow more towards him, because when you're both looking at, there's no triangulation, there's just direction. I have no clue how far I am for Jesus or how close I am. But if I can have somebody else over here, that's at a different place than me, that's also moving towards Jesus, and it provides a point of triangulation, all of a sudden I see, yes, like I am pointing at Jesus, but they're also pointing at Jesus, and it helps me see how far away from Jesus I still am.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we both need a lot of work to get there. But let's not just say, well, should you be where I am or should I be where you are, is not really the real conversation we need to be having here. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is even people that have been called to this space, like you said, it's still hard to say, well, how would you write a book about this? How would you have this discussion with somebody that isn't already sold on it, that's not already in your camp in a sense, because it's too controversial to talk about what should you eat or drink, or how should you grow what you eat or drink.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of God's heart, though, is he does want us to learn to do that as the church. And he wants us to learn how to let him speak into those areas of our life without just searching for a formula that we can tell everybody else they have to do.
Yeah. You did that really well in your book too, where you're talking about being gracious. So you talk a little bit about conventional farming and how that's maybe not the most God honoring way to farm, but at the same time you're reminding us, look, we're all in a journey. If I'm telling you what God has laid on my heart, what He's shown me over the years, and how I see, and I'm building a biblical argument for why this is the best way to do it, but I'm not trying to, hammer this over anybody's head. We're all wherever we are, you have that trajectory, right? Whether it's just you're strictly talking about your spiritual relationship with Christ, or, how we are doing what we do in our vocations, whether that's whatever it might be.
Hmm.
And so I really appreciated that in your book. But then I can see how there's this rub of of you know being faithful with what you know and what you've been given, and then not wanting to offend. So just let me just ask you, what's been the biggest, have you had pushback over the book? It was 10 years ago that you wrote the book. Have you had any pushback, and what's kind of the recurring thing that you hear from people say, no, you went a little too far, here? What, I mean, can you share with us some of that struggle you've had?
Yeah, I think there hasn't been, like a big single thing per se. I think I've heard some people that, if it is would be it is challenging if you read the book and you're not from the, I'm sharing from a particular journey that I've been given and I can't share from any other perspective than that. So if you are from a different, like conventional agriculture, um, culture and point of view, then it can seem a little like small scale, organic-y slanted. Even though I'm trying to give people, like trying to say it doesn't, whatever starting point you are, like we have to grow towards what God's called us to, and there's pros and cons in both. I think I know some people have said, like the idea of calling people to do something that allows, like dads to work with their kids is something is like good, but not always possible. Like not always necessarily something that's more holy than something else. And I can see that at times, that there's often sometimes things God calls men to that they can't be involved with their families in the same way that they could if they're doing like a home business or something. But I don't think that that diminishes the message God gave me to say that that's important
Yeah, or the
and
fact that it works in this application.
that it works in this application or that it's not valuable to, even when I go off and do things, even today, I want my family to be a part of the team. Like we're a team, even if I'm, different of us are not like are going out and doing different things.
Yeah,
But I think the biggest thing is over the years, it's been neat to see, and this is what I just encourage people to think about is we can be right in something or wrong in something, but if we don't bring it in humility, it's very hard for people to receive it, and we can be bold and yet humble. And I know some people have even told me in my book, like, you weren't bold enough. You kind of danced around too much. And that probably is the case as well. But I do know that I've had both, homesteaders, conventional Christian farmers, big scale corn and soybean farmers, my unsaved hippie farmer friends, my whatever, all read it and have had for the most part positive feedback because it's more of my personal journey, and I'm trying to share that in a way that um hopefully people can learn from. And so that's when we do a lot of training now, or just like it's so important to bring that humility when we're serving people, even if we're bringing in uncomfortable truths, because um it really helps us to fight the right battle, which is our battle with ourself and our own growth or lack thereof, not me versus you, which is what Satan always wants to try to stir up.
right. Exactly. Yeah. Um, can you give us, so again, a lot of what you do is about ministry and just building relationships and sharing the love of Jesus through what you do. Can you give us some real, you don't have to name names or anything, but just give us some specific examples? Is there any one relationship over the years that's just really blessed you or might encourage others as we think about how can we do the same things in our own vocations as we interact with other people? Just, maybe some exciting testimonies of maybe somebody coming to the Lord through your interactions with them, or something like that that you could share with us.
Yes, yeah, I would love to. It's interesting. There were several stories from when we were doing the farm. Like at our farmers market. um, different people we were able to talk to. It was interesting just as you see different people in different progresses of either coming to the Lord or being open to the Lord. I remember there standing there one time and I was talking to a yogi, a friend of customer of mine who we were talking about something related to God and having a little bit of a debate there, or not a debate, but just a discussion. And it was interesting because then I had another farmer in the booth with me at the time visiting, and she was becoming much more open to the idea of Jesus and how in a relationship with him. And so she was involved a bit in the discussion, and she felt a little bit more like down the road, like trying to help him, like. And then there was another friend of mine who was from church who was very interested in discipleship and stuff. So, anyways, it was my friend and then the farmer friend who was getting closer to Jesus, talking to the yogi with me. And then he leaves. Then we debrief with the farmer who's more open to Jesus about how that conversation went with him and how we can love him better. And then she left, and then we talk. I debrief with my church friend about the two conversations that we just had,
Yeah.
and so just this is all at the farmers market booth without really any intentionality to come and say, we're going to share the gospel today. It's just talking about life and what we believe and those kind of things. And so it's neat to see those kind of just things that God brings along when I think a lot of discipleship is just praying, God, give me eyes to see those opportunities. Just show me who it is today that I need to talk to about you. Um, we also had a situation where I was working on the farm, working in the garden doing something, and a friend of mine from church popped by, and he brought an exchange student that he had been building relationships with, who was a Muslim from Saudi Arabia, and they came up to the garden, and he was showing them around, and this guy from Saudi Arabia had grown up where his grandfather had horses and stuff, so he liked a lot of the country and things, but I don't even remember what we talked about. I just know that, a lot of my talk, I'm just saying, here's what we're doing. We're just trying to serve people, honor God, serve people in our community. I know a lot of the things I a lot of times say just when I'm talking about my garden, but I don't even, it was one of those conversations that was just another another conversation, right?
Yeah.
But it was later, like about a year later, maybe 6 months later, when this same guy came back, the same Muslim guy came back for a wedding on our farm for my sister, and I was talking to him just about, what are weddings like in Saudi Arabia, and those kind of chit-chatty things, and then he was just sharing with me. He said, all my friends, they come to, LA and New York, and I tell them, this is the real America. You know, he said, I went back to my home and was telling my father and my family about how, like, for you and your family, like your farm and your and garden and like your faith in God is like it's like one. He said, and my father was like, everyone quiet. What is this? Tell us more about this. And so I remember after having that conversation, just thinking, I don't know where this gentleman is now, or it's not like I heard that any of them per se came to faith right then, but there's this element of God saying, look, you faithfully weeding your garlic in your garden, if you're being obedient to what I'm told you to do, and you're doing it for me as an expression of your love for me, I can use that to bring the light of the gospel and the attractiveness of the gospel to parts of the world that you can't even go as a missionary, you know? And to see that was just such a neat thing. And then I remember being with actually helping at another farmer's farm where he had a volunteer there from Switzerland, and really dear friend, neat guy. And we had some really good candid conversations, me just being like, what do you believe, man, like over our break when we're in from the rain after the storm, and I just had some good conversations about what I believed and stuff. And he was honest about the idea that he had been open to faith at one point, but just couldn't get over the idea of suffering in the world, and there being a good God and that kind of thing. And so, I shared books with him. We had lots of neat conversations after that. But I just, when he left, he told me, I'm still stuck. I still can't quite get over, some of these obstacles I have to like putting my faith in Christ, he said. But I just wanted you to know that like my relationship with you and seeing you and your life does more to convince me of the truth of what you say than any book you could ever give me to read. So it was us farming together, you know, like me being there working alongside him that gave me the opportunity to be able to do that. And then since then, you know, we've been more training people and it's been neat. We had one couple that was sent from by a pastor friend of mine from his church down in Naples, Florida, and that's the video that you see if you go to the Wellwater Garden Project website. And and they came to our training and we just had them in our home. We just shared with them stuff. We just, you know, kind of tried to share with them what we had learned and some of the stuff that we kind of teach in the Wellwater Garden Project for 4 or 5 days. And but it was just neat to see what God did in their hearts and lives for them to. It wasn't just us teaching them the material. It was what they would say, like them being in our home and seeing Jesus in our messiness. We can't hide everything, can't hide anything when somebody lives with you.
Yeah.
Um, but then them going back and like she got baptized when she went home, like when they went back to the church because she'd never been baptized, like she was, and they just kind of sparked in them like a real passion. And then they trained several hundred people within the first couple of years, with quite a few people coming to the faith in Christ. They ended up like setting up every Saturday morning they would gather in the garden there by the church that they had set up, and people would they would have a prayer time, and people would share, you know, any prayer requests that they wanted, even if they weren't necessarily all Christians. Like they were invited to be a part of that if they wanted. And they had people that, you know, were there for a while, just seeing the love and seeing the community around. You know, it wasn't about gardening, right? But that was the context that it was in, and them finally being like, "What is all this Jesus stuff? Can you tell me more about this?" You know, and that leading to uh an opportunity to, you know, lead them to the Lord or share more about Christ. And I think that's I have one good friend that was doing some work out in a part of the country in a neighborhood where they were trying to do intentional community, intentional Christian community, you know, in a broken neighborhood with other Christians. And he was interested in the gardening, and as a way to provide a context for them to engage with people. Because they said, here we are, Christians in this neighborhood, but if all that we do ever together as a Christian community is like get together on a Tuesday night on the couch and share prayer requests with each other, what is there for anybody to see and be like, I want in, I
Mm-hmm.
want to be a part of this?
Right.
Um, and if they really knew what it was, even just sitting around on the couch, right? You know, like that's powerful. Like you would want in if you knew what it was, but sometimes it's living it out in a real way in our life that gives that opportunity for people to see it displayed or to see it not displayed, which is the sad part in the church. A lot of times they're like, I know what you say, but what I see isn't consistent with it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you're not living out what you say you believe. And I think that's where people are hungry for what one of my mentors likes to say, the gospel with boots on. The gospel actually lived out practically, applied in a way that you can see it, and then gives you that opportunity to tell people about Christ. And there's other stories as well. There's just how that even within the church, there was one of my good friends that's doing some training up in Indiana now with their Well Water Garden Project group. He and his wife met at a well water garden training, and then they got engaged in the garden as well. You know, so it
Wow.
can provide other opportunities too,
Great.
other opportunities for multiplication.
Yeah. So are you mainly doing the well water garden training locally where you are, and then people come to you and then they go out and do their own thing? Is that how it
Right,
works?
right. So we do a little bit of travel every once in a while, but primarily we focus on modeling ourselves on our own homestead, bringing people in that are interested in training in their own communities, and then supporting them when they go back to do it in their own regions. And some of them are going overseas as well, but that's kind of our passion. And then we have a well-water garden at our own church, and when we've been spending a lot of time recently with a local after-school project and community garden in the local town near us where they're utilizing this program. Because one of the neat things is because of some of the people that ask us to use the curriculum, we wanted to be able to equip Christians where if they get an opportunity to serve into, for instance, you're not just equipping a church group to plant a garden, but as a church, you're serving into a non-church, non-Christian community setting where not everybody is necessarily a Christian,
Mhm.
that you can come and serve them in a way that doesn't alienate them because you're talking to them as if they're Christians when they're not, right?
Right.
Um, And so what we do is we have the curriculum where the basic 12 lessons are written to a general audience. So community audience, meaning it has all the principles, all the, all the stuff in it, but you're not explaining the biblical basis behind it, right?
Mhm.
So it's talking to whatever audience you want to teach it to. You can use those 12 lessons and serve them in a way that they feel served without feeling imposed on by, something that they don't yet say they believe, right?
Sure.
Then we have 12 faith foundations that go with those lessons, which is all the scriptural biblical worldview behind the scenes of those lessons.
Mhm.
And that's to go through with a church group to equip them to see what the thought process is behind why we teach the lesson this way.
Yeah.
And then after that, we also have, like a kind of teacher's guide and teacher's lesson, like how to teach each lesson and those kind of things if you're training people to be trainers. But we really want to focus on not doing all the training ourselves, but mainly investing in people who are going to go be faithful to take it to their own communities, because that's the fastest way to multiply at the end of the day, and allow us the time to model ourselves living it out.
Now, let me ask you this. Is that how you got started with Foundations for Farming? Did you go to Africa and then bring it here?
I
Or was
did.
that? Okay.
Yep, yep. So Foundations for Farming originally was called Farming God's Way. There's still a network that operates under that name.
Hmm.
Very basically the same content, just two leadership structures. And so I had become aware of this group in Zimbabwe, Africa, that was teaching really amazing agriculture, really low tech and simple, but better than anything I'd ever done. And and when I listened to their farming conference talks, they were more Jesus centered than any Christian conference I'd ever, like
Mhm.
any Bible conference I'd ever been to.
Yeah.
And so I went over there and learned from them and felt like God was like, you need to take this back in these same principles of integrating, you know, worldview and the gospel and discipleship and agriculture and stewardship is what I want you to learn how that applies in the US, not just in a rural context in Africa. So I'm currently Foundations for Farming Network, which is the foundation of Jesus being the foundation of any good farming, is the network that I'm a part of currently and the representative for in the U.S. So the Wellwater Garden Project is kind of a U.S. tool, a tool for the U.S. to apply the principles of Foundations for Farming in a first world context.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit, Noah, I like to give my listeners some practical tips with every episode. And if anybody searches for Noah online, you're bound to find something about compost. So you've done a lot. You've talked a lot about compost. There's a lot of videos online that you talking about compost and doing it. Um, what is so? Just I'll let you kind of fill in. But what's your favorite way to compost? What's a very useful tip that you think anybody could glean from it? I mean, what's your one? If you were if what's your elevator speech? If you're stuck in an elevator with somebody and they
Yes.
ask you, "What do you think about compost?" What do you
Yes.
tell them in like 60 seconds?
Yes, I love that. I don't know if I had the perfect elevator speech, but I would just say a lot of the reasons I've ended up talking about compost over the years give credit to my mentors in Africa. They ended up, I'm just basically been teaching the method that I was taught from Daryl and Hazel Edwards of Foundations for Farming. And what they did is they were motivated to teach composting or to learn composting and simplify it in a way that the average poor, the poorest person could understand it and make compost so that they would not be dependent on chemical fertilizer inputs from outside, either handouts or things that might not get there. So the real heart behind having compost was to free a poor person from the bondage of dependency.
Hmm.
And I just loved that heart behind it. And so when I learned it and I came and applied it, I just saw, amazing results on our farm. But the reason I think it's so, valuable is because what compost does is it adds the two missing elements of healthy soil that most poor soils are lacking. If you go into the woods, you've got your minerals, your sand or your clay or whatever you have in your region. And then healthy soil also has all sorts of organic matter, dead things that have died and rotted, and all sorts of living things, microorganisms that are working in there and producing food for the plants. So poor soil typically just has the clay or the sand, just the minerals, and it's missing the organic matter and all the microbes that bring that plant food to the plants. So compost is just those two things, the organic matter mixed with the microorganisms, and it's living. That's why if you buy it in a bag from the store and it says compost, it's probably not the kind of compost that's really going to bring life to your soil. And so we've enjoyed over the years teaching people how to break their dependency from any kind of inputs of fertilizers where they can take what they have on their own farm and homestead. Even if you don't have animals, you can make compost. And it really closes the loop because if you can't produce your own fertility, you know, it's kind of like saving seeds. It's still like there's an element of sustainability you're lacking there because you're still bringing in something from the outside. We teach thermal composting, which is basically where you are going the extra mile to make a bigger pile where you manage the conditions a little bit more than a static pile where you just throw it and you let it rot so that the microbes are really really happy. They get really hot and they decompose it quickly in like 8 weeks. It kills any weed seeds, pathogens in it, and it makes enough compost in bulk that it can actually contribute a substantial amount of compost for a homestead. Because most composting systems in a little barrel or something, you're like, I've got a big garden out here. This is not enough, right? And I think there's two different objectives to making compost. Most composting systems, the objective or the value that the compost system gives to you is that it's eliminating waste in an economically friendly way, right? I want to get rid of something without throwing it in the garbage. I can compost it. That's the value. The amount of compost you get out of that is kind of a bonus. But as homesteaders, we want compost. Like that's what we're looking for. And so thermal composting is a system that allows you to create larger quantities, even still by hand, that would actually supply enough to meet the demands of a family on their homestead. So that's where, with the School of Traditional Skills and my friend Josh Thomas there and some others, I've been able to bring this system because it's applicable for the larger scale production of homesteaders that a lot of other composting systems aren't.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of labor intensive, right? You have to turn it, and it takes some muscle and some energy to do that, right? If let's say you find yourself not with that kind of energy or muscle, uh, animals. I mean, is that the answer? Is let the animals do some of that heavy lifting for you?
Yeah, there's all sorts of creative ways you can build on that system. I actually have a friend of mine who, the simple system we teach with composting, a big part of the objective of that system is to communicate the principles of what a good composting system takes, what that process is in a way that's understandable. You strip away all the unessentials and you can, okay, I see how that works now. So I had a friend of mine that was doing like letting chickens stir it and those kind of things, but it still wasn't working for him. He learned, the simple system we teach and then was like, I get it now. And then he went and like used the chickens to make it again, but he had understood the principles he was missing and then it started working for him. But when people ask me that question about the labor, I guess I typically always come back to farming and homesteading is not a solo sport. You need to find a team,
Hmm.
and composting is probably one of the lower labor intensive things you're going to do on your farm. I mean, it's like forking a bit of material back and forth a few times. It's not that much work, honestly, compared to it's just like it's not doing nothing. But you really need to be, if you don't have the physical capability, you need to be partnering with somebody else. And I think one of the most beautiful stories I've heard lately from some of the trainers that we do, and we have an online Redeeming the Dirt Academy that's a free online community and like teaching platform for Christians that are interested in agriculture. And we do some monthly coaching calls with the students there. And a few of the students this last time, one of the ladies, she's been doing the well water garden with some people in her community. And I think it's so beautiful because she said, she said, all of us are like, we either have just had knee replacements or we're in a wheelchair or we had, a brain injury last year or she's like, we have so many physical limitations. It's laughable to see us out there working on this garden. She said, but you should see the garden. Like it's we're doing it. The Lord's helping us. We're having fun together. and she said it's kind of funny and like silly at times to see us all trying to do this, but it's so healthy for them, and such a good thing for them to work together doing. I just love hearing that story every time she shares that, because I think that's one of the things that the best community is built around things where we can't do it by ourselves. It's not just because, hey, you want to hang out? It's like, hey, brother, I can't do this unless you help me. Would you be willing to help me?
Hmm.
That's what knits us together.
Yeah.
And as American individuals, we like to say, I don't ever want to put myself in a position where I need other people. But that's not necessarily biblical.
Yeah. Yeah.
God is not intended for us to be able to live solo like that in a way that we don't need each other. And so embracing the way that farming and homesteading makes us need others, and cultivating a way in which we can all depend on each other. Dependency is not a bad thing if you're depending on things that are dependable or that God has designed us to depend upon. The dependency is bad when we're depending on things that aren't dependable or untrustworthy, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the danger of we start thinking too self-sufficient. We want to be self-sufficient of the wrong things. Instead, we want to shift our dependency from things that aren't trustworthy into the people and persons and things around us that God's put as the traditional normal way for us to see Him provide for us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. And that's it's humbling. I for the longest time, I've been kind of a, if you want to do things right, do it yourself kind of guy. And I've just been trying to break that. And to varying success. So it's a journey. It's a long journey. Um, so real quick before we wrap up, just where are some of the places where people can find you? Do you have anything new going on? You gonna write another book someday?
Yes, I would love to. Yeah, I can. A lot of our stuff is on, you can find it on redeemingthedirt.com. I think I have links to the Redeeming the Dirt Academy and the Wallwater Garden Project and other things. I have a really good, not I have a really good, but like that friend of mine, Josh Thomas on the School of Traditional Skills, did a really good job of putting together a great video course of our
Quality is
composting.
wonderful.
Yeah, amazing quality there. Josh is really great guy. He came to one of our Redeeming the Dirt conferences years ago, and so um, has a real heart for the Lord and for this stuff. But those are some places you can go, and then yeah, just right now, I think the biggest thing I'm seeking from the Lord is like what is the most effective thing for me to spend my time on? And I really would like to spend. I have so much. I feel like if I died tomorrow, then I would have a book or two that I had not written that I needed to.
Yeah.
Because people will ask me, like, oh yeah, is that in your book? Is that in your book? I'm like, no, man, I've most of the stuff I teach now is I've learned since then. Like it was
Yeah.
not that
Yeah.
was a snapshot of my brain then, but most of what God's doing now is since then. So you can just
Yeah.
pray that God would give me direction on how to use my time in a way that He shows me when the right time is and what things to write about, because I do have that growing sense of needing to do that, but also a bajillion other things too. So
Yeah. Well, I hope the Lord will bless you in that. And you have 7 kids under the age of 13, so that's a big priority there.
it
To
is.
be a father and don't let any of these other things,
Mm-mm.
take second place other than Christ himself.
Yeah, appreciate that encouragement. I need that.
Yeah. So no, I think I'm taking this cue from you on your podcast, but would you pray for us, pray for my listeners as we close?
Yes, definitely, definitely. Oh God, thank you so much for this time together that Dave and I have been able to have. We just thank you that you are the one who is working and moving in your people. You're the one that created agriculture in the first place. You planted the first garden and assigned that to the first man and woman, the first family. And I pray that you would just show us, Lord, how to bring uh, the gospel, just your redemption plan for fixing that broken relationship, Lord God, through Jesus, how to show that through our lives. Pray for all the listeners, Lord, whatever they stage they're in, whether they've never done any agriculture at all or they are have been in farming for a long time, that they would just be able to ask, how can I better reflect who God is through my life and what I do, and so that people can see you through me and help me to be a disciple worth multiplying. That if God copied and pasted them through their community, their faith, that it would be something that would build your kingdom, and that we would focus first of all on that being a disciple worth multiplying. I pray that you just bless um, everyone listening, that you protect them from the attacks of the enemy, that you would help them to take to heart any truths that were shared today, and help them to see through or forget anything that was not true and not helpful. And I pray that you just help David and I, Lord, as we try to lead our families, that you would just help us to seek your face, that you help yourself to be clearly heard, so that we can leave everything to follow you, and that you could use our lives, Lord, to impact others and to shine as a light in this dark world. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Noah. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciated getting to know you and having a conversation with you. So thank you very much for it.
Thanks again.
And to all of you out there, you've been listening to the Homestead Guy podcast. We'll catch you next time.